Hello, everybody. Today, we are very glad to thank you for joining the Don't Contaminate the Oceans with Radioactivity International Forum, Voices of People around the Pacific Rim from around Japan and even across the world. The organizer of today's event is Citizens Conference to Condemn Further Pollution of the Ocean. This is a very long name, and so we call ourselves Kore Umi, or this ocean, in advance. So the kore means this, any more than this, no more than this, and umi is ocean. So please remember us in both Japan and internationally as kore umi. My name is Terumi Kataoka, and I will be your host today, and it's my great pleasure to have all of you joining us. So I will first of all introduce today's program and some information about the forum. We will be having the slide shown first in Japanese and then in English afterwards. Part 1 today, we'll be hearing presenters from different parts of Japan and around the world. And the second part will be a live panel discussion with each of these presenters. Following the panel discussion, we will also have time for question and answer. So we look forward to your interactive participation there. We have many people joining us today, and in order to hear as many voices as possible, we would like to ask you to keep your questions or comments brief, and also to indicate which person you would like to ask the question to when you write these in the chat. We will also be having today's event with simultaneous interpretation between Japanese and English. Click on the globe logo you can see at the bottom and select the language you would like to hear. So we'd like to get started with today's forum. Our first speaker to introduce the situation of Fukushima today, our efforts, and the purpose of today's forum will be Ruiko Muto, one of our members. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for attending today. Don't Contaminate the Oceans with Radioactivity International Forum, Voices of People Around the World, the Pacific Rim. My name is Ruiko Muto of Citizens Conference to Condemn Further Pollution of the Ocean, Koreumi. Koreumi, our organization, has been working since 2014 out of a concern about radioactive substances flowing into the ocean and a desire not to pollute the oceans with radioactivity any further. Today, I am, and I guess we are, very pleased and grateful to have this opportunity to hear from Mulan Andrew from MISA for the Pacific Marshall Islands Student Association, Tsukuru Force, Pacific Asian Nuclear Free Peace Alliance, and Dr. Arjun Makijani from the US Institute for Energy and Environmental Research. Moreover, we'll also have video messages of solidarity from China, Taiwan, Australia, and Korea. The Earth is called a water planet. Life on Earth would not be possible without the oceans. We humans have polluted the oceans with various chemical substances. The atomic bombs, nuclear testing, nuclear facilities, and accidents at nuclear power plants have also caused a great deal of radioactive pollution. And now we are deliberately releasing even more radioactive substances into the oceans. We are very sorry and distressed that Fukushima, which caused the nuclear accident and spread so much pollution to the oceans already, is now discharging even more into the world's oceans. The oceans connect the world, and the oceans are the common property of all living creatures on Earth. The oceans provide us with so much, and we cannot allow them to become even more polluted. I sincerely hope that today's forum will be a meaningful gathering to share wisdom and join forces with you to stop the deliberate discharge of ALPS-treated contaminated water stored at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant into the ocean, and to prevent further pollution of the world's common property, the ocean. First, I will talk about the progress to date and the movement of citizens regarding the ALPS-treated contaminated water that TEPCO and the Japanese government are planning to discharge into the ocean next spring. Now, to begin with, the issue of contaminated water began in the very first place when the coastal cliffs were cut down by 20 meters to build the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. When the ground was dug down, the stream was cut and the underground water vein was cut, causing about 800 tons of groundwater to flow into the site per day. This was pumped up by wells called the subdrains and dumped into the ocean, but the earthquake and tsunami destroyed the subdrains, and the groundwater that flowed into the buildings, together with rainwater and water injected to cool the reactors, came into contact with the melted down nuclear fuel, generating vast amounts of radioactive contaminated water. Even after the accident, some 400 tons per day of groundwater continued to flow into the site. As a measure to stop the groundwater from flowing in, the government and TEPCO implemented a measure called a frozen soil wall. In fact, in June of 2012, a decision was almost taken to build a landside barrier wall using clay walls. But this was abandoned before TEPCO's shareholders meeting because the company was unable to announce the huge cost to the shareholders. It was then decided to invest 34.5 billion yen of taxpayers' money for a frozen soil wall, as this option would allow the government to use its research and development funds and eliminate TEPCO's cost burden. However, the frozen soil wall was incomplete, imperfect, and could not stop groundwater. And even now, 140 tons of water per day is flowing into the buildings. The service life of the frozen soil wall is said to be 7 years, and the deadline really is approaching. In addition, the electricity cost to freeze the water is 1 billion yen per year. So measures against groundwater must be fundamentally reconsidered. With regard to the Alps-treated contaminated water that continues to accumulate, the government's Contaminated Water Treatment Committee established a tritium water task force to consider 5 options: geological injection, oceanic discharge, steam discharge, hydrogen discharge, and underground burial. Following this, the subcommittee on handling of treated water from multi-nuclear removal facilities was established to examine the issue from a social perspective, including reputational damage. At the explanation and public hearing on handling of treated water from multi-nuclear removal facilities held by the subcommittee in 2018 at 2 locations in Fukushima Prefecture and in Tokyo, there were 44 public speakers who expressed their opinions. And of 44, 42 wanted onshore storage instead of discharge into the environment, into the ocean. However, in February of 2020, the subcommittee submitted a report to the state, the government, which stated that, quote, the release of water vapor into the atmosphere and the release of contaminated water into the ocean are realistic, with the release to the oceans being more feasible, adding that measures against harmful rumors should be implemented. The Ministry of Economic Trade and Industry, METI, called for public comments between April and July 2020, and many of the more than 4,000 public comments submitted were against the release of contaminated water into the ocean. The Fukushima Prefecture Federation of Fishermen's Cooperative Associations and the National Federation of Fishermen's Cooperative Associations have adopted a resolution against the project, and the agriculture, forestry, fisheries, tourism, and consumer organizations in Fukushima Prefecture are also against it. In addition, 70% of the municipal councils in Fukushima Prefecture have issued a statement of opinion either against the government or for more caution at least. However, on April 13, 2021, without any parliamentary debate, the government decided on a policy to release the contaminated water into the ocean at a meeting of relevant government ministers. The government did not consult neighboring countries connected by the sea or listen to the concerns and protests voiced by other countries. In 2015, METI and TEPCO made a written commitment with the Fukushima Fisheries Federation that they would not take any action without the understanding of the concerned parties. We have asked TEPCO and METI in various forms, various platforms, how do you define understanding? And who are the parties concerned? But they simply repeat, we'll persistently fulfill our accountability so that we can gain your understanding. But what they mean by understanding is a situation where residents, without complaining, just follow the decision or agree to the decision of TEPCO and the government about the release of contaminated water into the ocean. Before the release, the Ministry of Economic Trade and Industry, METI and TEPCO have been frantically advertising and giving lectures at schools and other places, but they are giving fraudulent explanations by placing a measuring device that can only measure gamma radiation against a bottle containing tritium, which emits beta radiation, and showing how the needle does not react to reassure the public. We have repeatedly asked TEPCO and METI to stop this kind of practice that makes fun of citizens and high school students, but they show no sign of stopping. Disposal of contaminated water has been promoted from the outset with a claim that it's essential for the smooth implementation of decommissioning. The logic used is that decommissioning equals reconstruction of Fukushima and is thus for the benefit of the big victims of Fukushima. But TEPCO and the government only provide explanations to the local government councils and organizations they have intentionally selected, and they do not themselves hold meetings to explain and discuss the situation with the local public. This week, from December 13, METI awarded Dentsu a 1.2 billion yen order to carry out a nationwide publicity campaign called the Project for Activities to Foster Public Understanding of Alps Treated Water and Other Related Activities. This includes TV program, commercials, newspaper ads, web ads, outdoor and traffic ads. The slogan is, let's know it together. Let's think about Alps treated water together. This is to promote reconstruction to prevent reputational damage. This is what they say in this huge promotion campaign. Other pamphlets and videos have also been produced, and symposia and seminars have been organized. Alps treated contaminated water contains 860 trillion becquerels of tritium, which is difficult to separate from water. Tritium is sometimes said not to be a problem because it only emits low energy beta rays, but it has been pointed out that when combined with organic matter, it enters the body and can enter cells and DNA, causing damage to surrounding cells. And it's not only tritium that's in the water. Although TEPCO claims to have removed 62 nuclides, nearly 70% of the water stored in the tanks exceeded standards for radioactive substances other than tritium. This fact was revealed by media reports. The other substances that were found to have exceeded the standard was, until then, TEPCO had explained that all but tritium was within standards. The other substances that were found to have exceeded the standard was strontium-90, which tends to accumulate in bones, and iodine-129, which has a half-life of 15.7 million years. It is unclear whether these will be removed reliably in the secondary treatment. TEPCO has stated that the Alps treated contaminated water will be diluted with seawater after secondary treatment and discharged into the sea over 30 years. But as there are no restrictions on the total amount of water that can be diluted, it will eventually all be discharged into the ocean. Several alternatives have been put forward by the public. These include sequential transfer to large, robust tanks, which have already been proven to work, or storage on land using mortar solidification. There is also a proposal to build a large-scale underground barrier to fundamentally stop the generation of groundwater, which has also been proven to work. But there is no indication that either this government or TEPCO are discussing these alternatives. During this period, we citizens have acted in various ways to stop the discharge of contaminated water into the ocean. These include negotiations with TEPCO, town meetings in various parts of the prefecture, petitions to the governor of Fukushima Prefecture, the Fukushima Prefectural Assembly, and local authorities, and standing in the streets also. We have also invited TEPCO and METI to exchange opinions with us on 4 occasions. We are now promoting an action to send postcards to the governor of Fukushima Prefecture and the mayors of Okuma and Futaba, appealing to them not to discharge the waste into the ocean. We are doing our best to persistently do all we can do. TEPCO has dug 80% of the tunnels for the water release and seems to be steadily advancing the construction of the discharge outlet, but it's definitely behind the original plan. I think that the fishermen, our citizens, and the opposing municipalities may be putting the brakes on the project, even if it's just somewhat, the effect is somewhat. We are not going to give up, and we are going to do the best we can. That's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Muto. So thank you very much for that. We'll progress to our next speaker now, and I'm very glad to introduce Tsukuru Force, who is active on the west coast of the United States. I'll just explain one more time how to use the interpretation function before we'll be hearing from Tsukuru, who will be speaking in English. For those of you already listening to the interpretation, we understand that you should be able to use it already, but please click on the globe sign and you will be able to select the language from there. So we're very glad to introduce Tsukuru Force today, who is with the Pacific Nuclear Free Alliance. Tsukuru is very active in many different fields of activism, including as a trans peace anti-nuclear human rights activist in Los Angeles. As a graduate of a high school in Hiroshima, where 350 young lives were brutally taken on August 6, 1945, Tsukuru's life mission has been to act, educate, inspire, and mobilize to move the world closer to a nuclear-free future. And as well as these various activities, Tsukuru is also organizing screenings for political and socially aware documentary films from Asia that may not find their ways to major distribution otherwise. So we'll now hear from founding member of the Pacific Asian Nuclear Free Peace Alliance, Tsukuru Force, sharing some perspectives on the activities and views from California. Tsukuru, over to you.
Thank you so much. I just want to say, first of all, I am very, very humbled and honored to be invited here to present among the such distinguished speakers. And I'll just do my part as best as I could, because I am just one activist who is very, very passionate about stopping this world from contaminating itself further and leaving a better future for our children and future generations. So without further ado, I'll present my perspectives on the issue and what we have been doing, what we look forward to doing in the near future. So I am part of a sort of a collective called Join the Fight, Stop TEPCO, which includes actually the Manhattan Projects for Nuclear Free World in New York, No Nukes Action in San Francisco, and citizens groups in San Onofre, California, and also Activist San Diego, and Mothers for Peace in San Luis Obispo. And so I actually, first of all, what I want to do, I'll share my, let's see, excuse me. Okay, my computer's very slow right now, but okay, yeah, my screen is not moving. But so I wanted to share when Japan announced its plan to discharge wastewater from Fukushima, I was observing the media activities in the United States, and it seems to me that in the beginning, all we can find, especially when you Google keywords such as Fukushima water on the search engine, what comes up first was actually stating the opinion that water discharge from Fukushima is completely safe. But I've been encouraged recently, especially from the beginning of this year, the perspectives who are questioning the safety of water discharge are slowly appearing, on the mass media, maybe not like major media, but kind of niche media. So I've been very much encouraged about that. Okay, so actually, since my screen is not moving, maybe I can ask someone to share the screen for me, and I'll just stop sharing because I would like people to see the screen. Sorry about that. I don't know why it's not moving on my end. Is it possible for someone to share my slides, and then I can just tell you to, yeah, sorry, excuse me, sorry.
Yes, we'll do that
apologize.
for you. So just one moment.
Thank you. Thank you. So you can just advance. Yeah, and yeah. Yeah, so this was like what I was talking about. It's just a series of articles that I found on the web. So that is to say, like as I said in the beginning, there were articles after articles who are supporting supporting the TEPCO and Japan by saying that it's completely safe. But I think this year, the articles who are questioning the safety of the discharge are starting to emerge. So that's been very encouraging to me. Please, next slide. So yeah, so this was like April 13, 2021. So this was actually good article from the Science magazine, but it's still stated, next slide, please, stated that, stated that, it's safe to discharge water because by diluting the radioactivity can be reduced to safe levels. That's what the article said. But next slide, please. So yes, so this was like August 26, 2022, the Japan Times. And actually, I didn't know I was joined by, I will be joined by today by Dr. Makijani, and I'm just really pleased that, he's with us. But so yeah, five distinguished scientists published this article on Japan Times to state that more data is needed before ocean release of Fukushima water. Next slide, please. Yeah, so essentially, the five scientists advocated that in order to ensure the safety, more data are needed, and what we have right now is really not enough. So next slide, please. Yeah, so scientists' voices like this are really, really important for us activists, because in order to make our case, really, like, we need some kind of evidence to back up our statement. So I've been very, very encouraged, and I really completely rely on scientists in the world to come forward and voice their opinions, and also perspectives to state, the water release from Fukushima should be questioned. Next slide, please. Yeah, so adding to like another statement from a scientist who actually I've been in communication with, Dr. Tim Deere Jones. He is an independent marine pollution researcher. So he's said many things on this matter, but one of the things that I actually have been using to talk to people is his point that, it's really not enough to say, okay, so let me go back. In a lot of people's opinions, people say that, okay, so if what ocean is contaminated, it will contaminate our food source, which is such as fish. But he's saying that it's not really enough not to eat fish, because even if you avoid eating fish and other like ocean food source, because the water evaporates and it will travel to the shore. So what he's saying is if you're living within 10 miles of shoreline, you are at risk of inhaling these particles. And so, it's not enough to say that, okay, the food source is in danger. Actually, if you live close enough to the coastline, you are in danger. So that actually really, gets people's attention. So that kind of thing I learned from our scientists I'm using, when I talk to people. Next slide, please. So I just want to point out, and I'll be really quick to talk about this, but one of the things that we have as activists, we have in our ammunition, so to speak, is a Fukushima radiation on the U.S. West Coast. Next slide, please. So this monitoring has been done with the collaboration of Mothers for Peace in San Luis Obispo and Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. So they've been monitoring water on the California and west coast of the United States, and they've been finding Fukushima radiation. So that's a supporting data when we talk to people, to ordinary citizens, how radiation from the other side of the Pacific can travel to the coastline of California. Next slide, please. So yeah, I'll be rather quick with slides here, but such as in November 2014, trace amounts of radioactivity from Fukushima were found in the Pacific Ocean of the California coast near Eureka, which is northern part of California, to the north of San Francisco. Next slide, please. In April 2015, the highest levels seen anywhere in North America since the testing program began was measured near the beach between Los Angeles and San Diego, 8.4 becquerels per cubic meter of radioactive material. So next slide, please. And in February 2018, the levels of Pismo Beach, which is near San Luis Obispo, where Mothers for Peace is located. And also that's actually the site of, the San Luis Obispo is the site of the last operating plant, nuclear power plant in California. So we are advocating, we are trying to have the plant close as soon as possible. Actually, it was scheduled to close in 2025 and 2024 and 25, but it's been the license has been extended, so we are opposing that. But anyhow, so yeah, the radiation has been found in the coast of California. So data like this actually are helping us to alarm people and actually call their attention to the possible danger of the water discharge from Fukushima. Next slide, please. Oh, okay. So yeah, so this goes on, but I don't want to be dwelling on the data here, but again, so the point is, they've been monitoring the water of the coast of California, and so they've been finding heightened level of radiation, as recently as like 2018, 2019. So that's the kind of data that we rely upon when we talk to people. And I think this presentation will be available later, so I'll just skip forward. Next slide, please. Yes, so this is actually, to me, the most important part of the presentation, because as an activist, I really, I consider this as a great opportunity to meet people across the ocean who are working on this issue as well, and brainstorm, what we can do together. So let me just throw out some ideas that we have going forward in 2023. Next slide, please. So this was actually, these are the pictures from June 2022 of this year, when we launched this campaign called Don't Nuke the Pacific, Stop TEPCO. So this is Santa Monica Beach next to LA, essentially. And a few of us were out there on Sunday in June. And what we decided to do is actually to talk to people, approach people who are enjoying themselves on the beach, because these are the people who are probably most interested and most who has the most investment in the safety and cleanliness of the ocean. So we went up to people to speak to them and to inform them of the water discharge from Fukushima. And there are about three reactions, typical reactions that we got. One, there were some people who have heard of the planned discharge. Two, there were people who have never heard of the issue and were very, very surprised and alarmed. And there were people, who really didn't want us to disturb them. But what I want to tell you though, mostly, I would say like 95% of people who we approached were willing to, listen to what we have to say. And also, I would say about maybe 60-70% of people, who listen to us were really interested in doing something to stop this from happening. So that was very encouraging to us. Next slide, please. But unfortunately, though, I have to say that I think in the United States, the public awareness is not nearly enough to stop this from happening. So I think the number one thing that we have to do is to raise public awareness among people who are not necessarily interested in nuclear matters, who are not like nuclear anti-nuclear activists and stuff like that. So more public actions are needed, such as like, us going out to the beaches and set up some kind of booth, every weekend if necessary, and talk to people who enjoy, who come to the beach to enjoy themselves. Would you click, please? And another thing we could do, we are planning to do is municipal resolutions in coastal cities. That is to say, approaching city councils, the government body of coastal cities along the, especially along the West Coast, such as LA, San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, places like that, and work on politicians and work with politicians to pass the resolutions to oppose the water discharge from the Fukushima plant and appeal to the Japanese government and TEPCO. Click, please. And also appealing to mainstream media, I think, is extremely important, especially in the beginning of the year. They start talking about what to look for to the new year. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to do things like letter writing campaigns. Also, maybe if it's possible, earlier in the year, maybe February, if we can do like a global day of action, and so that we can do some kind of action in the multiple cities across the globe, I think that will get the mainstream media's attention and get them talk about this issue, so that people can find out more about what's happening and what the danger is. Click, please. Okay, so raising awareness on wastewater dumping in the ocean. So what I wanted to say with that, actually, can you move forward the click, and actually, I need to see the next slide. Yeah, so one of the things that's getting our attention is that it'll be very, very effective to get people's attention by connecting the issue of Fukushima water discharge with domestic issues in the United States. Because some of the nuclear power plant which have been decommissioning, they have been getting attention about their water discharge. And I pointed out the 3 locations here. One is near me, San Onofre, and another one, other two locations on the East Coast. One is Pilgrim in Massachusetts, and Oyster Creek in New Jersey. So these 3 locations are, all discharging wastewater from their plants, and local people are very, very active right now to, question the safety of it and stop it from happening. And that's getting a lot of media attention. So in order to get people's attention and have them pay attention to the issue of Fukushima, I think it'll be very effective for us in the United States to link up with local activists in Massachusetts and also New Jersey, and California, of course, and campaign together for the cleaner ocean and stopping water discharge from nuclear power plant that contaminate our water. Next slide, please. Oh, okay, so sorry. Yeah, so this is actually 2 days ago, the article that I found. So EPA, Environmental Protection Agency in the United States, warned Holtec, which is really into the decommissioning business of nuclear power plant, and they managed Pilgrim nuclear power station. So the EPA warned Holtec that they can't be discharging water without the new license. And if they still discharge water, they may be fined. So that kind of news is very encouraging for us. And I really, really glad that local people in Massachusetts are very, very, active on this issue. And, which is the interesting thing about this is that the situation at both Pilgrim and also the Oyster Creek, they are, fishing towns, and their industry, the fishing industry are one of the main industries of the local population, local population. So it's kind of, it kind of mirrors the situation in Fukushima. So, we would very much like to work together with activists in Massachusetts and New Jersey. Next slide, please. So this is actually my last slide, and I'm not Gen Z. Generation Z is people defined as people who were born between 1995 to 2010. So really young population who are very, very good at using social media and who actually are becoming a huge political force in the United States. So appealing to Gen Zs is really critical to advance these issues because they tend to be very, very sensitive to environmental issues. But I'm learning from younger people. These are the memes that we used when we did the social media campaign back in September. Unfortunately, there wasn't much enough effort put into this campaign, so we didn't have a desired effect. But younger people are very, very really active in social media. And these memes, I'm 51. I won't be able to come up with these things. And some of the things, I just really, frankly, we have to be very sensitive not to offend people or add to, reputational damage that people in Fukushima already suffer. But I'm learning from my fellow activists who are in the younger demographic and utilizing social media to spread the message and also enable them to spread the message on behalf of us and appeal to our government. So this is all I have. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm just looking forward to discussing what we can do together going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Guru. Thank you so much for this wonderful and very precious report. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Arjun Makhijani, President of Institute for Energy and Environment Research, IEER. Dr. Makhijani is a president of IEER near Washington, D.C. And he has a PhD from UC Berkeley, specialized in nuclear fusion. He has produced many studies and articles on nuclear fuel cycle related issues, including weapons production, testing, and nuclear waste over the past 20 years. And in 1991, he was also a pioneer in the study of how we can save energy. And recently, he's also writing quite a lot about carbon-free and nuclear-free. And his recent book include Carbon-Free and Nuclear-Free, A Roadmap for U.S. Energy Policy, IEER, from IEER Press. This was the first analysis of a transition to a U.S. economy based completely on renewable energy without any use of fossil fuels or nuclear power. He is also the principal editor of Nuclear Wastelands and the principal author of Mending the Ozone Hole, both published by MIT Press. So Dr. Makhijani will discuss the expert panel's memorandum sent to the Pacific Islands Forum in August this year, meeting on the scientific status of the planned release of radioactive cooling water from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant accident. And over to you, Dr. Makhijani. Dr. Makhijani, I think you're still muted.
Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate being invited to be here. But before I start, I should say that this does not represent the views of the Pacific Islands Forum or any of the governments of the forum. The experts prepared this memorandum based on our findings and our meetings with TEPCO and Japan and so on. But it doesn't represent, they may or may not agree with us, but these were the experts' views. And to the extent that I might say my own views, you can verify what I say is from the memorandum, which is the expert panel views, and then some things that I might give you my own views, especially maybe in response to the question. Let me share my screen with you. I don't know why I am not able to see. Let me see. Sorry about that. I don't know why I'm not able to get my screen to share with you. Let's share, but then I cannot find my slide. Oh, there we go. I'm trying to put in presentation mode, but it doesn't want to go there. It worked earlier. Can you see my screen? Can I just proceed? Even though it's not in presentation mode? There. Okay. Yeah, so we prepared this memorandum in August of this year. We have been working since the beginning of the year for the Pacific Islands Forum, and the 5 members of the panel have different kinds of expertise, some in radiation. I have my engineering background from University of California and nearly 50 years of studying these issues. And then we had oceanographic and ecological experts and nuclear physicists and so on. We found, actually, to my surprise, that the depth of the problems was much greater than we anticipated. And our concerns deepened the more we discussed with TEPCO in Japan. And at one point in the last meeting, the Nuclear Regulation Authority also joined us. We also were able to observe the IAEA presentations to the forum. And throughout this process, our concerns and my own concern deepened instead of lessening. You might imagine that a scientific exchange would lessen the concerns, but they actually got bigger. And our memorandum was a complete agreement and consensus between 5 scientists with quite different backgrounds and expertise. So that also was very gratifying that we were able to come to this conclusion as independent scientists. So there are deficiencies in 4 areas, and this is a huge thing, 4 major areas of deficiencies. One is, do we know the contents of the tanks? And what are the measurement protocols? And what does it mean eventually for this proposal to discharge? And what we know about safety. So we have been told that it will be safe, but if we don't know properly what is in the tanks, how can we say that it's safe? So that was one major area of concern. Are the measurements good? Are they sufficient? Are they statistically representative? The other thing was, will the ALPS perform as required? So you reprocess, you retreat the water, some of which, as you have heard, has contaminants, radionuclides other than tritium, far in excess of allowable limits. And will it remove those radionuclides sufficiently as claimed by TEPCO? We are not so sure. Then there were deficiencies in the analysis of the impacts on the ocean. And that was also, some of the things in that regard were also quite surprising, because not very scientific in some way. And that's not an easy thing to say, but that is what we concluded. And then lack of consideration of alternatives, we proposed 3 of them that had not been considered as yet, or at least 2 have not been considered, maybe 3rd partly considered and rejected. So there are 64 radionuclides in these tanks, according to TEPCO, but only 9 have been routinely sampled, and a maximum. So we had 3 years worth of data that was supplied to us by TEPCO that we analyzed. Dr. Ferenza Dalnoki-Veres actually spent a lot of time going over those spreadsheets. They were not in good condition to be analyzed. The units were different. It was not a very scientifically sound way to send data to other scientists, but we analyzed it anyway. Maximum number of radionuclides we saw, 19 out of 64. Most of the time it was 7 plus tritium and carbon-14, so 9. Sampling was inadequate in quantity, so not enough samples. So there are tank groups, number of tanks are connected. They're quite large tanks, and there was only one 30-liter sample taken per tank group, just one. Sampling was unrepresentative. That means it was not statistically designed to know averagely what is in the tank. So that means we don't know, and we discussed this with TEPCO. So this is not just, so we have presented these findings to TEPCO. They did not dispute that the sampling was unrepresentative. That basically the idea was that we're not very concerned right now with what is in the tanks. We're concerned with what happens at the time of discharge. And then only 20% of the tanks have been sampled. So overall, the sampling situation is very poor, in my opinion. Those words are not in the memorandum, but that is my conclusion. The knowledge of the radionuclide contents in the tanks is far from sufficient to say we are going to be able to treat this successfully and discharge, and the discharge will be safe and will meet the limits. So this is the data compiled from the data sent to us by TEPCO. And as you can see, 64 radionuclides are at the top of the graph. The red line represents the maximum radionuclides measured. And you can see most of the time it was either 7 or 9 radionuclides that were measured. Then there was the question of what do these measurements tell us? So strontium-90 and cesium-137 are produced in roughly the same quantities as the reactor generates power. So roughly in the same quantities in the molten fuel in the reactors. But in the wastewater, in the water in the tanks, the strontium-90 and cesium-137 ratios are quite variable. I'll show you how variable they are, but it means that ALPS treatment may not be working uniformly to remove one or both radionuclides in the same way over time. It may mean that they're collecting different amounts of radioactivity. The efficiency of ALPS varies. We have not had a scientifically sound explanation of why these ratios are so different. And these are two of the most important radionuclides for ecological impact and health impact that need to be considered. So there are radionuclides other than tritium in the tanks. So some of the tanks have sludge. That is, particulates that have settled in the tank. So it's not like the tanks are all uniformly liquid and they can be pumped out and treated. Some of the tanks are like that, but the early tanks for the first 2 or 3 years after the accident, there were a lot of particulates, and some of those particulates have settled. My own suspicion, and this is just me speaking, is the sludges in the bottom of these tanks are probably much more radioactive than the average of the water. And they will also disproportionately contain plutonium isotopes and americium-241, the highly radioactive alpha emitters that are quite dangerous to health. We did not get a very clear answer about what they're going to do about these sludges. Now, removal of the water above the sludges could mean many particulates go up with the water into the ALPS treatment system. How will the ALPS treatment system handle it? We didn't receive an answer. One of the most surprising problems, and you will please permit me to explain this technical problem to you at some length, because this was the most surprising, unscientific part for which we got zero explanation when we raised it. So TEPCO measured a fission product called tellurium-127. Tellurium-127 is produced while the reactor operates and generates energy, but it has a half-life of only 9 hours. So accident was on March 11th. By the end of April 2011, Tellurium-127 should have disappeared almost totally. And by the end of 2011, nothing should be found, nothing. And yet in 2019, they gave us several measurements indicating, first of all, the measurements were not properly represented. They indicated very high threshold of detection, which didn't make any technical scientific sense. That's not how measuring instruments that are good will respond to high contamination. And then the numbers there were very large concentrations of tellurium in 2019, which is technically impossible unless there are accidental criticalities, chain reactions going on in the molten fuel. So we have raised this in the memorandum that you have, that Mari has translated, and thank you very much, Mari, for translating the memorandum. We raised this with TEPCO. The IAEA has it. The Nuclear Regulation Authority has it. When TEPCO responded during a meeting, they said, well, 2019, but it was 2014. And so I pointed out that in 2014, you should find nothing. And they said, well, maybe this December 2011. And I said, in December 2011, you should find nothing. So this indicates that measurements are not being done in a scientifically sound spirit. And if you make a mistake, we all make mistakes. I certainly have made mine. But if you go to my institute's website, you will find errata. Sometimes when we make mistakes, we say, yeah, we made a mistake, and we publish a correction and inform the public what is the correct number or what is the correct situation. But instead of doing that, TEPCO has failed to acknowledge this problem. It's not the first time. Ferenc, my colleague, pointed us out a similar problem in 2011, and I worked with him back then. I was quite active in analyzing Fukushima issues after the accident. And TEPCO responded by removing the data from the website, but never explained how these problem measurements came to be in its data. So this is a huge problem because it indicates not approaching the problem in a scientific spirit. And if you have made a mistake, you should just admit it, fess up, move on, figure out what gave rise to the mistake so you don't allow them. So here are the strontium and cesium ratios of ALPS treated water. So this is water that has been treated, and then before entering the tank, some measurements were made. So strontium 90 to cesium ratio can be as high as 10,000, as high as 100, as low as 1. So many measurements have ratios much greater than 1. And then also it can be less than 1, 1/10, and even less than 1/10. So this variation by a factor of more than 10,000 between the lowest and the highest has no explanation. And these are very, very important radionuclides. And then in some of the water, they are present in quite high concentrations. So will they be able to remove it? The testing of the ALPS system has not been sufficient, in my mind, to say that ALPS treatment will be successful. When this was raised, basically, TEPCO and the IAEA indicated that, they will just treat ALPS, run it through ALPS, and treat it many times. How many times? We don't have a clear answer. How long will it take? If you have to treat it many times, will it be 30 years then, 40 years, 50, 60? No answer. So you can see the whole process just in the beginning, from the measurements, what's in the tanks, how will that affect the ALPS functioning? None of that is being done in a scientifically sound manner. And if it were just our opinion without talking to TEPCO, you could say, well, maybe we made a mistake. But we have presented these things to TEPCO and not received any response saying that expert panel, you are wrong. This is the correct thing. This is how we are going to do it. But no, we have not received any satisfactory answer. So, as I have said, presence of sludges, the high variability of strontium and cesium, potential of stirring of particulates, all these are going to be potential problems for treatment. And then if there are problems and you have already decided you're going to discharge and you're not doing anything about it now to prevent the problem, then it could become stuck. Of course, more water is being generated. So while they say 30 or 40 years, this whole thing could run 50, 60, 70, 80 years. So the urgency question is kind of mysterious because this is going to go on for the half a century or the better part of a century. It's very risky to decide to proceed without adequate knowledge of what's in the tanks that's detailed enough to say if the ALPS will function properly, and then to test ALPS with the kinds of materials and water that is going to be treated, including the tanks with the sludges. So up front, and one of the big surprises was that when the IAEA got our materials, they basically have said, we don't need to know now what is in the tanks. We will see after ALPS treatment whether the water is safe to discharge or not. What will you do if it's not safe, doesn't meet the criteria? Run it through ALPS again. How many times? We don't know. This is not a good way to proceed with this huge, important proposal and then say in advance that we know it's going to be safe. I don't think that they can make this statement with scientific confidence. At least I would never do that. So ecosystem assessment. So first of all, there are these other radionuclides, strontium, cesium. They're not going to be completely removed. Strontium concentration in TEPCO's assessment was assessed to be a maximum of 10, but strontium 90 can concentrate in the bone and through the ecosystem food chain much more than that, and that has not been taken into account. Tritium is radioactive hydrogen, it's radioactive water is what we're talking about. When living beings take in water, it becomes organically bound. Our DNA has carbon and hydrogen and oxygen. That's mostly what we're made of. Has some trace and nitrogen, phosphorus, a few other trace things, but mostly hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen. So if your hydrogen is radioactive, then your cells are going to have radioactivity. And let me say, I've studied tritium a lot. And so this is me speaking. Actually, I have a book that is going to come out on tritium next month. When tritium gets inside the cell, it's mostly water, and it ionizes that water. It creates hydroxyl radicals. These are very chemically reactive, and they can damage not the nuclear DNA alone, they can damage the mitochondria, which are the energy system of the body. So these mitochondria produce ATP. When you move, when your heart beats, when we breathe, it's the mitochondria talking. They convert our food into the energy that we need for the heart to beat. And what hydroxyl radicals do, what tritium can do when it enters the cell and ionizes and radiolizes the water, it can cause DNA damage in the mitochondria, not the nuclear DNA, but the mitochondrial DNA, which is in the cytoplasm. When we raise this issue with TEPCO, in their ecosystem assessment, they ignore organically bound tritium. When we raised this in a meeting, they said, well, we can take into account that it will be organically bound tritium will be 10% based on official assessment of the International Commission on Radiological Protection. But what was that report? That report was what happens when human beings drinking water is contaminated with tritium, what happens in our body. But we're not talking about drinking water. We're talking about seawater contaminated with tritium and what will happen to the whole ecosystem. And when we raise this issue that you have to consider the entire ecosystem, the benthic organisms at the bottom, the pelagic fish which roam the whole oceans and everything in between. They said we're not required to consider those things. And that's where it stands. That is not an ecologically sound way to approach this huge problem. The intergenerational and transboundary impacts have also not been given due attention. So alternatives. Now, this is my last thing. So some alternatives have been considered, and you know that, I won't dwell on it. But what we felt is that the water can be treated through ALPS, new tanks built that are seismically safe to store this waste for a long time. If you remove most of the radionuclides, then you have essentially tritium and carbon-14 and mostly tritium. And tritium has a half-life of 12.3 years. So after 60 or 70 years, it will mostly be gone. They are actually, this discharge could well last more than that. But once you have done that, you also have other options, because tritium, as has been said, is a beta emitter in that, demonstration that TEPCO has been doing. If you take that demonstration and ask, well, what happens if you make concrete with tritium, that tritiated water? The concrete will essentially stop those beta rays. If you make concrete, for example, that is not for buildings, but for underneath of bridges, stuff that will not have human contact, the radiation dose potential would be eliminated. And, even when you take apart those structures after 50, 60, 70 years, the tritium will be pretty much gone. There's also bioremediation. Various plants and fungi can concentrate tritium, and then that concentrated tritium can be treated as solid waste. There's so much solid waste. This decommissioning is going to be a huge, giant problem. This particular problem should be one of the less difficult problems. And what TEPCO and the Nuclear Regulation Authority, in giving permission to do this, have done is they have taken one of the less difficult problems and are converting it into a multi-generational Pacific Ocean-wide problem for generations to come. We were dismayed, and I was especially dismayed, that when the IAEA learned of this, they basically said, we don't need to attend to this now. We will see later after the ALPS treatment, and we don't really need to pay attention to what is in the tanks now. This is, I think, an extremely serious problem, given that IAEA is the internationally recognized authority on these kinds of issues. They're doing a good job in many contexts, including in Ukraine currently. But in Japan, my opinion is that they have not done their due diligence. And that is a very disappointing thing to say, and I say it very reluctantly. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arjun Maktiani, for this very sombering but also important information that you've shared. And during the following panel discussion, we would like to have some time for questions and hearing from you further. So thank you so much once again, Dr. Arjun. We would now like to introduce 4 video messages from different countries and regions around the Pan-Pacific area, from Australia, mainland China, Taiwan, and also Korea. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Tillman Ruff from IPPNW and ICANN. I'm pleased to be speaking to you from Boonwurrung land in Melbourne, in Australia. I'm pleased to join you on this important gathering. I want to acknowledge and apologise for the sadness it brings that uranium mined in Australia is now the cause of the fallout and harm and so much distress and ill health as a result of the ongoing Fukushima disaster. It shows us just how interconnected both the nuclear industry is and the release of its products in terms of their effects. Also, the Japanese government's management of the ongoing Fukushima disaster has been a litany of failure and lies since the beginning, and regrettably that continues with the terrible decision to apply 19th century thinking that somehow dilution is the solution to pollution and discharge large volumes of contaminated water into the ocean, where they will spread through the food chain and ocean currents and affect people and ecosystems long distances away. The National Accident Investigation Commission established by the Japanese Diet was scathing in its conclusions that this was a preventable human-made disaster that was the result of essentially regulatory capture, the failure of governance processes, and the safety of people and the environment being disregarded. Unfortunately, that litany continues. One of the most pernicious areas where myth and untruth has been deliberately spread is in the area of radiation and health. The claim that 100 millisieverts of radiation and less has not been associated with any proven health harm is a lie. The arbitrary and continuing increase in the maximum permissible dose of radiation for the population, including its most vulnerable members, to 20 millisieverts per year, a 20-fold increase, continues now more than a decade after the disaster. Even the acceptance of that as the benchmark for return, now even being increased to areas over 50 millisieverts being deemed suitable for some return and activity, shows an egregious disregard for human rights and health, the health of people and planet, and a lack of respect for evidence. The claimed target of less than 1 millisievert per year at the site boundary as the target for radiation control is really irrelevant for the water discharge, where the principal risks through the food chain and need to take into account the very significant factors of bioconcentration and recycling of key contaminants in the marine environment. Alternatives, of which a number exist and have been put forward, prolonged storage, use of contaminated material in low exposure, durable materials such as concrete to which people won't be exposed to any great degree, have not been adequately considered. Rights have been ignored, both of people in Japan and of people potentially affected around the oceans of Asia and the Pacific. The process for considering such important decisions needs to be open, transparent and accountable, respect human rights for those directly affected, and be evidence-based. The concerns about the planned discharges are not just among governments in East Asia and the Pacific, but also no less than 9 UN special rapporteurs have drawn attention to Japan's obligations to prevent exposure to hazardous substances, to conduct proper environmental impact assessments, and to prevent transboundary environmental harms and protect the marine environment. This flawed plan can still be stopped and a better path found, and I hope this meeting helps to contribute to that outcome, and I'll be pleased to stand alongside you and work for it with you. Thank you.
大家好，我是来自台湾的环保团体绿色公民行动联盟的秘书长崔树新。在这边，我要表达我们希望日本政府撤回福岛核污水排放的计划。我们在台湾发起了联署与抗议。在这边，我们要跟大家说明的是，我们曾经在连续3年的时间，在日台交流协会以及台湾的外交部前面 发起抗议，也希望正式的邀请日本政府能够听听台湾民间团体的声音。我们希望的是，福岛核污水不应该就这样子的排放到太平洋里，会造成海洋的危害与污染。那参与的团体在台湾并不是只有环保团体，包含教育的团体、人权的团体，许许多多的团体都有这样子的呼吁。在2022年的8月10号，我们组成了全国的废核行动平台，号召台湾的民间团体一起联署，并发起了一封公开信，呼吁日本政府能够撤回福岛核污水排放的行动。而我们这封公开信也经由管道正式提交给在台湾的日台交流协会，请他代为转交给日本政府。目前核污水还没有开始排放，所以我们认为还有机会。我们希望日本政府能够考量未来对于台湾渔业以及海洋可能的冲击，能够撤回计划。台湾民间团体的共同主张是，如果日本政府宣称核废水真的没有健康疑虑，那为何并不能一直存放在福岛电厂周边，或在日本本土找其他的闲置空间安置就好，何必要排入海洋？而因为有这样子的疑虑，将核废水排入海洋，其实等于是造成邻近国家的困扰。我们认为在排放之前都还来得及撤回决定。福岛第一核电厂是发生过核灾的电厂，它所储存的污染水是经过核灾之后受污染的辐射水，与一般核电厂正常运作的水是截然不同的。由于核污染水具有高放射性，向太平洋倾倒放射性水是违反国际法的。在1972年，防止倾倒废弃物跟其他物质污染海洋的公约，还有伦敦议定书都明文禁止在海洋倾倒任何剂量的放射性物质。因此，我们在台湾的民间团体，我们共同的诉求与呼吁：第一点，希望日本政府能够撤回福岛第一核电厂释出放射性废水到太平洋的计划；第二，请日本政府聆听福岛以及周边的农林渔业合作组织以及消费者，乃至于国际社会相关团体的坚定反对声音。第三，希望日本政府撤回同意电力公司排放污水的决定，也要求东京电力公司能够提出不会造成邻国困扰的核废水储存或处理方案。那这是今年8月我们在日台交流协会之前，委请日本的代表能够将我们台湾民间团体的公开信转交给日本政府。那我们这样发起这样的抗议，其实并不是只有今年，我们曾经在2021年还有2020年连续3年都发起一样的抗议。在这里我们要再次呼吁，希望日本政府能够聆听不同国家以及日本国内反对的声音。我们反对核污水排放入海，我们希望守护海洋环境。谢谢大家。
嗨，各位关注福岛核电站核废水排放问题的朋友们，大家好，我是杜文杰，是来自中国的一家民间组织大连高新区蔚然滨城志愿服务中心的负责人。非常高兴有机会通过视频的方式来参加这个论坛，并和各位进行交流。2021年4月13日，日本政府正式决定通过向海洋排放的模式来处理福岛第一核电站事故后产生的核废水。这项决定公布之后，中国的民间环保机构和关注海洋保护议题的民间组织就旗帜鲜明地表达了反对意见。200多家机构通过互联网平台发表联合声明，明确表示对日本政府这项决定的担忧，呼吁日本政府重新审视核废水的处理方案，并建议对福岛核废水的解决方案进行科学的论证，接受民间组织和国际社会的监督。自联合声明发表至今，中国的民间机构一直在持续关注着日本核废水处理的事态变化和相关进展，并呼吁日本政府能够以对人类和地球环境负责的态度来慎重决策，在未得到相关利益方普遍认可的前提下，不要贸然向海洋排放核废水。 目前的研究证明，在福岛核电站里存储的核废水中，大量的放射性物质超出了标准值，没有达到排放标准的处理水比例很高，而且核废水中放射性元素的排放总量尚未评估。这些放射性元素如果排入到大海，虽然浓度会下降，但排放总量是不会变化的。而且现在有数据证明，放射性元素在海洋中极有可能存在富集的现象。这些放射性物质进入到鱼类体内会发生变化，人适应后相当于长期处于核辐射的状态，所产生的影响将难以预测。针对福岛核废水的处理，有增加存储罐量、地下掩埋、注入地壳，以水蒸气形式排放到大气中等其他的处理方式。东京电力选择了最为经济的稀释排放的模式，这对于人类而言，会不会是最为昂贵的处理方式呢？我们只有一个地球，福岛核废水排放可能造成的海洋放射性污染将会波及到所有人类，后果之大，将是人类所面临的前所未有的风险。为了我们人类共同的安全，我们呼吁日本政府拿出更为稳妥的处理方案来降低风险。在这里，蔚然槟城向参会的各位伙伴发出倡议，让我们投入更多的精力来关注福岛核废水排放的进展，并带动更多的民众能够关注到这个议题，为解决当前存在的问题提出更有建设性的方案。我们也希望通过本次会议的召开，关注这个议题的国际同仁们能够成立一个沟通和行动的网络，后续为改变当前的状态来共同发力。蔚然槟城与各位伙伴一起，为推动日本政府选择对环境友好的方案处理核废水而共同行动。如果有任何需要，不要犹豫，请联系我们。再次感谢大家对这个议题的关注，为了共同的家园，我们一起努力。
Hello, はじめまして。I'm Su Yang from Seoul. I work at the Center for Peace and Disarmament of PSPD. And Pacific Ocean is our common ocean. We South Korean people is so worried about the Japanese government plan to release the contaminated water into the Pacific Ocean. It will affect not only people but also every life in the ocean. I would like to express my huge solidarity to you and your action for our common ocean. And we know that the nuclear power plant and nuclear weapon cannot be the answer for our future. So let's make a nuclear-free Northeast Asia together. Thank you and ありがとうございます。
Thank you so much for each of these messages from around the broader Pacific region. This was a huge encouragement to us, and we can really strengthen our communication and solidarity from here. Today, we have actually 188 people participating now, of course, from Japan and all around the world, including both of the guests from China and Australia who shared these video messages, who are joining us live today as well. Thank you so much for these important and encouraging messages. So next we will have a brief break. We would like to have a few minutes before we go into part two. Part two will be a panel discussion where we will hear from each of the panelists and also have a chance for questions and comments from the audience members today as well. If you have any questions or comments, please use the Q&A function in the chat. And please also include the name of the speaker to whom your question is directed. We will start in 5 more minutes in Japanese time, 11:50 a.m. So just after 5 minutes from now, please grab a cup of tea and we will continue after that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We hope that you had a... Thank you very much. Okay, we'll just check that the sound is working. Yes. Yes, we can hear clearly. So we will continue with part 2 of the program. Thank you very much for staying with us for this session. From now, we will be inviting the panelists from part 1 and also Mari Inoue and Saeko Uno to join. First, I will introduce Mari Inoue, who is a lawyer from New York in the United States. She is active in the fields of working toward a world with no nuclear power and weapons, involved together with various legal recommendations and so on for the support of people impacted by nuclear weapons and she is also the translator of Dr. Arjun's recommendations, which we've heard today. Saeko Uno is a person who has moved or evacuated from Fukushima to Kyoto. She is the organizer of a series of online events called the Ocean Dialogues on these issues. Today, we will be discussing what kind of steps we can do beyond international borders to link together to stop the release of contaminated water into the ocean. Before we go into that, we'll have a bit of time to deepen the discussion or the comments by Tsukuru and Dr. Arjun. And we will be passing over to Mari to facilitate this part, to ask some more questions and additional information and so on from the panelists. Mari, over to you. Thank you for the introduction. And Tsukuru, thank you so much for your very deep information-packed presentation just before. I think one important point that you raised within your presentation toward the end, you shared about how people can see this as an issue connected to their own lives, close to them. And looking at this situation not as something just happening in Fukushima in Japan, which is far away, but something which, if the same thing were to happen in the United States, this would create a precedent which would allow this kind of thing to happen. And so having people engaged in this issue, interested in this issue, and raising awareness through connecting it and making people feel how this is relevant for them, I think this is a very important point. Tsukuru, I wonder if you could share a little bit about your activities with local city councillors or local activists, local people involved in environmental issues or labor issues within these activities. And at the time when you have spoken to them about the issue of the Fukushima contaminated water, could you share a little bit about that? Yes, and thank you so much for the question. Yes, so where to start? I think one thing, I'm not sure whether what I can say will be so useful for everybody, but our activities until now, at the very least, were very, small local steps, shall I say. And this is, well, me personally, as an anti-nuclear activist, I've been involved for several years now, but within people involved or already aware about nuclear issues, of course, having their eyes and ears open and studying about this issue, of course, for them, the message has been conveyed very clearly. But for people who are not already engaged in nuclear issues, who are involved in broader environmental activities, for example, or labor issues, or also, anti-war or these kind of activities, people who are not so much paying attention to the nuclear issue until now, I think it's very important to be able to connect with them, to connect with a broader range of people active in different fields. I'm personally a transgender activist and involved in this intersectional way and involved in different activities, different programs as well. So I think when we say just the issue of anti-nuclear, it perhaps reaches a smaller audience. However, if we're able to reach out in a broader way on different issues and show how they are connected, how they are related, for example, holding a booth at an event which is on a different topic as well and share with them. That's one of the tools which we have been doing. For example, in June of this year in Los Angeles, there was something called the Summit of the Americas. This was something held by President Biden, inviting the different heads of states from Latin American countries. And there were some different public gatherings or protests or events and so on by different progressive groups in California at the time. And there was a 3-day, very broad conference that brought together many different progressive, or shall we say, groups somewhat on the left. And so we held a booth in order to share information about the contaminated water issue. So this is an event where people interested in labor issues, human rights issues, various other issues, but not necessarily aware of nuclear issues. Also many journalists, for example, people active in press freedom, these kind of issues as well. So being able to share information about what's happening at conferences and events with people who are gathering for different issues. So people who are not necessarily always directly aware of nuclear related issues, but have a broader, a broader interest in social issues. Thank you very much for that. And I thought your point about connecting it to the decommissioning issue as well. On the East Coast, it's, on the Atlantic Ocean, of course, and people often maybe say that, oh, well, it's different to the Pacific, the Fukushima doesn't really connect to us. However, when connecting this to the issue of what to do with water in the process of decommissioning of existing nuclear power plants, looking at the water from the pool there and the Atlantic Ocean, or looking at, for example, Indian Point in New York and how this potential or the release into the Hudson River, for example, these kind of discussions and bringing it to people's local context to make it something that is connected closely to them is something that, looking at if Fukushima water release is created as a precedent, what this means for people who are living in areas in the proximity of other plants which are to be in the process of decommissioning. This is also something I think which is important to continue these kind of conversations and ensure that there are linkages in this. This is something I thought was very relevant. Yes, and as Madi has said, this creation of a precedent is something which I think is a very important point. One other thing that I wanted to share in relation to that is recently, as I mentioned briefly, people who were not involved in nuclear issues until now, often they ask me, what happened to the water at Fukushima? What's going on with that? Where is it up to? And I think it's very good that they are raising these kind of questions. One question I hear quite often is, if it's so dangerous, why is the US or the Biden administration not making any statements to Japan about it? A lot of people ask that. And what I say as my pure, personal response is, well, because in the United States or around the world as well, places that do have nuclear power plants, there is this water being released. And so because the US is accepting this in its own company as well, so the US isn't able to complain to Japan because it's thinking about what to do with its own water issue as well. This is something which is very surprising for people. So because I'm living in Los Angeles, we have San Onofre very close by LA, of course. And so it's about 70 kilometers or some distance somewhat like that from LA. So for people even living in LA, they don't know much about San Onofre. They don't know much about any potential impacts or any potential release of water there and so on. And so when we say that, well, the US doesn't say anything to the Japanese government because it also has its own different programs and its own dangers that it doesn't want information or awareness raised about in the US. So I think for me, what I think is very important is to connect it to local issues in the US for people to pay attention. I think that's very important. In April 2021, when Japan decided to go ahead with the release, on the next day after that, actually, Blinken in the United States, the Secretary of State, said, well, thank you to Japan for making this decision. And the United States from now also will be supporting this plan of discharge. And in August of this year, at the UN headquarters in New York, at the time when there was the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Review Treaty in New York, the US also said that it was in support of Japan's plan to release the water in Fukushima. But we can see, of course, the fact that Japan, as a country protected by the US nuclear umbrella and other countries as well, said that, well, this contaminated water issue from Fukushima should not really, or does not need to be discussed at the NPT review conference. So we could see the discussions about this and that the United States is not seeing this issue as something, serious, and perhaps it's pressuring Japan or having discussions with Japan on other relevant issues as well. So in that sense, I think for us to appeal as people living in the US, the connection and the responsibility that we have in regards to that also. Thank you very much, both of you, for these comments. Of course, we would love to hear much more, but we would like to continue proceeding. And next to hear from Dr. Arjun Makijiani. Within the different questions and so on that have been raised, and hearing your recommendations and the expert panels, I would like to first of all speak a little bit about our activities as Kore Umi, the Fukushima local organization, something which is not very well known in Japan, but in April last year, when the Japanese government made its decision, the Pacific Islands Forum voiced its concern about this. Micronesia, the Marshall Islands, Northern Mariana Islands, Tinian, and so on, then after this clearly expressed their serious concern and asked for more consultations with Pacific countries from the Japanese government. Learning about this, as our local organization, we held a discussion session with the METI in Japan, and we raised the issue of the letter from the Pacific Islands Forum as well, which raised that, well, praising the strong relation between Japan and the Pacific Islands, the fact that there was no prior consultation was something which they expressed their concern about. And so we, in the discussion with our Japanese government, we asked, why did they not appeal or discuss with the Pacific Islands then? And the response from the Japanese government was, this was not content which needs to be consulted with others. Other countries as well, when they are releasing the water, they do not discuss this with their neighbors. But at the same time, because we had these voices of concern, we made this information available as soon as possible. And so the Japanese government said that they were sincere in regards to their response to the Pacific Islands Forum, but we as citizens called for more spaces for consultation. We also see on the screen just now, there was the resolution from Micronesia or the Mariana Islands as well, stating their anger, stating that there was no consultation, no communication at all. And this is because the impact was already decided. So there are various statements from the Pacific saying that do not allow the Pacific Ocean to be used as a wastebasket for contaminated water, that there should be no right for one country to unilaterally make this decision. In response to this, locally in Fukushima, we had various activities to respond to these international statements. We expressed our thanks and solidarity to the people of these Pacific Island nations who made such statements. We have also tried to communicate and work together in coordination with other countries throughout the Pan-Pacific region as well, to think about what we can do together to prevent this, or exploring what we can do together. So Dr. Arjun, sharing your recommendations or the findings of the expert panel really shows us that it's really a great motivation or something that we can use in our activities indeed to raise these concerns. Thanks to the Japanese translation by Mari, we can see there's a lot of information, but I wonder if, first of all, we're going to have a response from Sayako from Fukushima. She has a question for Dr. Arjun. So we'll hear from Sayako, and she will share a question for Dr. Arjun from now. Sayako is someone who has moved in evacuation from Fukushima to Kyoto, and she has some comments or questions that she would like to share with Arjun, so we'll hear from her now. Hello, and thank you very much, Dr. Arjun. It was great to hear from you directly today, and also thank you so much for sharing these very important findings from the expert panel as well. I have evacuated from Fukushima Prefecture, and as Dr. Tilman Ruff mentioned in his video as well, looking at the issue of the impacts of radiation and really looking at the very important standards that we need to keep in mind, the fact that, lowering the different safety standards and so on. has been quite challenging. So for those of us who are evacuating, we are very concerned about, or we feel that this policy is just ignoring our rights, our health, and so on as well. And so we're wondering what it is that we can do about this situation. And within your recommendations, we'd like to ask that within the data that is being announced by TEPCO, you have mentioned that there is some insufficiency or not enough. Looking at the different, balances, or you've spoken about the different things between the cesium and tritium and so on in your presentation. Within such a situation and looking at the different proportions of the radioactive materials and so on, the information that you've shared, what I'm particularly interested in, looking at the bioremediation, for example, if you could share a little bit more about that. And also with the using the treated water in concrete in a way that will not have impact on humans. You mentioned about this as another potential method, particularly looking at this, how to utilize treated water in other ways. I think this is something that we need to, of course, be cautious about and have more research about. But Dr. Arjun, I wonder if you could share a little bit more about this kind of concrete in which the treated water could be included. In what kind of situations could that be used? What if you could share a little bit more concretely about what this concrete would look like or be used for? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm so sorry for the distress that you have experienced and that your family has experienced, and leaving your home could not have been an easy decision. So I truly am sorry that you had to suffer this. This is a problem with nuclear accidents. Like, when the tsunami hit, there was much destruction, but in those places you could rebuild because it was not radioactive, and wastes from the accident. It was a very difficult and different situation. So I am very sorry. So it's not different than any other concrete. So the amount of tritium is very radioactive. So a very small amount of tritium, there's a very small amount of tritium in terms of mass in this water, but it contaminates water intensely because it's extremely radioactive. And so the amount of tritium is not going to, so basically like ordinary water, and water is used, that's made radioactive intensely by the tritium in it. But the bulk of it is just ordinary water. So water is used to make concrete, and it would be used to make concrete. So ideally you would build a cement making concrete mixing plant right there at Fukushima. I looked at how much concrete Japan makes. Japan uses about 40 million tons of cement a year. So this water could be used in a small fraction of the concrete, like for the girders under bridges, or even making waste containers, various applications that are not buildings like where people would live. And only a small amount of concrete that Japan makes would be involved. And instead of 40, 50, 60, 70 years, it could be done in a few years. The tanks could be emptied, and then the water that is being generated could be similarly treated. There is no ideal solution. So I'm not saying this is a perfect solution or that there's no harm or zero risk. But what I am saying is that it's an option that A, prevents contamination of the oceans, that A, is much more likely to prevent intergenerational harm, that is likely to keep essentially all the radiation away from people and also from other organisms like the fish and shellfish. I think the most important thing is the ocean dumping plan, and this is my personal opinion, we have not discussed it in this way on the panel, but in my own personal scientific opinion, as somebody who has studied waste problems for 40 years, of all the options, this is the worst. Ocean dumping is the worst by far. Now they can say the doses are small, but that doesn't actually matter in the sense that you have an obligation to minimize the damage, and especially an obligation to not use the ocean as a dumping ground. And bioremediation, certain plants, fungi will concentrate radioactivity, take it up, but then you have the problem of what are you going to do with all of that? You have to treat it basically as solid waste. It is being done in various places in the United States, various kinds of bioremediation. So that may be a possibility, but if you ask me my personal opinion, I think treating the water and storing it in safe tanks and then using it in concrete, among all the options that I have seen, may be the least damaging. But we didn't examine it in great technical detail. So I think if there were a serious effort in 3 months, you could come up with an answer as to whether this is the best way to proceed. But TEPCO has absolutely refused to consider it. The NDA has refused to ask them. The IAEA has basically said, we're not going to worry about the problems now. And so essentially endorse the dumping without saying we are endorsing the dumping. Because if you say construction should go ahead and we don't care what's in the tanks today, they didn't say it in those words, but that's my surmise, that we'll measure the water before it is discharged. But then if it's not satisfactory, what are you going to do at that stage? And there's no answer to that question. If you have to go through ALPS 100 times, are you going to do that? The indications are from them that, yeah, they would do it. The cost and time implications, we don't know. So I think it's not a sensible way to proceed, certainly not responsible for future generations and for the common heritage of humanity in the oceans. Not only humanity, but more and more we realize that we are just one more living being among so many, and that we are interconnected. And this is the way to affect the most possible living beings that you could, dumping it in the ocean. That's particularly lamentable. So there is no ideal plan. Once the accident has happened, in a way, once you have created the nuclear power plant and all the waste, there's no ideal solution. But there are solutions that are much, much less damaging. Concrete, I think, it would be my choice to examine most in detail now. But most important is for the government of Japan and for TEPCO to stop this.
Dr. Makhijani, can you elaborate a little bit more about one of the suggestions about bioremediation? Like, is there any successful example somewhere in the world?
Yeah, well, there are various examples of bioremediation in the United States. Mostly it is used for chemicals, because bacteria and so on will break down the organic toxic chemicals into carbon dioxide, water and so on. It's more difficult with radioactivity and with the volume of water we're talking about. Bioremediation may apply to the tanks that have high levels of strontium. Ideally, I think ALPS treatment should proceed, and it should be stored in seismically safe tanks. So you can imagine maybe some part of the water might be bioremediated where you can't get some of the radionuclides out, or iodine 129, for example. But overall, I think for the volume of water, bioremediation should be considered, but it could be a complex option.
I see. Thank you. And do you plan to publish your memo online, or what is your plan?
Currently, we are circulating it. You are free to use it. There are 188 people on this. I presume they all have it. We want to be respectful to the Pacific Islands Forum, so we have not yet published it online, but all of the members of the expert panel are circulating it to the concerned public. And so far as I'm concerned, you are certainly free to use the memorandum, and to the colleagues from other countries, Taiwan, China, Korea, who made presentations. If you want to make your own translations, The English is available. I understand some members of the press have it. And somebody asked whether I would be willing to talk to the press in Japan. Yes, I have often talked to the Japanese press over the decades, not only about this, but about many other issues, including the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the past, 25 years ago, 30 years ago. And so I would be quite happy to talk to the press. Feel free to circulate my email to and Psycho, if I can help in that way to you and your fellow residents who have similar concerns, I'd be happy to.
Thank you. And have you ever shown your memo to one of the established media here in the US?
Yes, we actually tried to get an article published in the Washington Post, but were unsuccessful. Certainly, we did send it. Some members of the media, I think one of our Australian friends, not Tillman, who is on, and Tillman, I appreciate you being part of this and for your message. So the press has it. There hasn't been a press event. I would be happy to have a press event if you want to organize one and inform my fellow panelists to see if they want to participate. I know one of my fellow panelists whose partner is from South Korea is going to go to Korea next month to present to their politicians and their executive branch and people responsible in their government. And I think he will probably talk to the media. I'm happy to also do it from here. I travel less, but I'm happy to do what I can this way.
And what was the reaction from the Washington Post? Like,
no, they didn't accept.
They're not interested in publishing it. Do you know?
Well,
why?
they have, so I don't know whether I would condemn them or put it that way. They have a lot of requests for materials, and maybe they don't see this as that important, given everything that is going on. I don't know what their reason was. But we didn't hear from them. Normally, you send them an article and they don't publish, they don't tell you why.
Do you think that IAEA and the United States are collaborating? Why are they complicit on this? What do you think?
Well, the IAEA has a conflict of interest, the same way the Atomic Energy Commission had in the United States. So on the weapons side, it is clear they have a mandate for inspections and so on. They're not promoting weapons production. On the nuclear power side, they have a dual mandate. They are promoting nuclear power on the one hand, and then on the other hand, they're supposed to provide advice on safety and environment and radiation discharges and so on. This is a conflict that, would lead generally to the minimization of problems. But even given that, I was shocked that the IAEA was not concerned to know what is in the tanks today and how that would affect the treatment as well, and was basically willing to say, okay, go ahead and start the construction and then we'll see later. On another matter that I did not mention, and if you give me a minute, I would like to mention, is initially when the expert panel was formed, there seemed to be some readiness on the part of the IAEA to talk to the expert panel directly, because we are, after all, scientifically appointed by the governments of the Pacific region, the 18 governments that are members of the Pacific Islands Forum. And so we are, in a way, official scientists for that forum. They may or may not accept our advice, but we give them the advice according to our best scientific judgment. And we have been able to arrive at a common scientific judgment. And initially, I did not know whether we could, because so many different, from so many different fields. But my current understanding is that the IAEA is actually refusing to talk to us. They said they treat us as any other scientist on the street, and which is a very shocking thing, especially given our findings. Our findings are should be shocking, even if somebody is not concerned and thinks the doses are going to be low and dumping may not be too bad. Just the scientific problems and the way in which it is being approached should be shocking for an institution, not only TEPCO, not only Japan's foreign ministry, but also your nuclear regulation authority. Regulation authorities are supposed to be more serious, in my opinion. And I think knowing what they know, having seen our memo, refusing to engage with us in more detail as to why we arrived at. You take that tellurium 127 thing, so simple. You should have no tellurium 127, but you claim that it was there and you are measuring it. And when we raise the question, you move around and say not 2019, maybe 2014, December 2011, and then in the end, none of those were satisfactory answers and no answer was forthcoming. Me as a scientist, that's very shocking. Even if the plan were perfect, it's shocking in itself because it makes me say, how can I trust the measurements? If they are not willing to address this kind of problem that is so blatant in the measurements, how do I know that any of the measurements are right? And currently, as me personally, not talking for the expert panel, currently as I sit here, I can't say that I have confidence in TEPCO's capacity to make good measurements. And besides, not statistically representative, and we said so, and they said it doesn't matter, which to me that makes sense. So refusal to talk to the expert panel by the IAEA, I think, is a big problem. The Japanese government has talked to us, the TEPCO has talked to us, but in the same way as you mentioned earlier, where they say, we want your understanding, which basically means we want your agreement. And when we did not agree, and that's where we are, we did not agree.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We could, of course, continue many things to discuss, but I'd like to hear next from Ruiko Muto of Fukushima, looking at particularly what we can do from now as well. Ruiko, what are your thoughts on hearing from Arjun and Tsukuru, and your thoughts for future steps as well? Thank you so much to the presenters today and everybody joining this panel as well. Hearing this conversation, I think when we look at this Alps treated contaminated water release into the ocean, I think this is really a big international issue. Looking at this nuclear violence being used to threaten our global environment and indeed the planet. Hearing voices from outside of Japan of their recommendations, letters, and voices being directed towards the Japanese government, despite the fact that these voices are being raised. Those of us living in Japan, living in Fukushima, often we don't necessarily hear about these international efforts and these different developments and movements. For citizens, I think we need to make sure that we are not isolated, that we are connected with one another. Looking at these different efforts around the world to stop this release of the contaminated water is such a huge encouragement for us. And particularly looking at these scientists, with a conscience who are working hard to protect our planet and people as well, is a huge power to us as well. Concerned and active scientists have such an important role to play, which we are grateful for. So I think we had a lot of ideas and suggestions, including by Tsukuru today, for example, going to the beach and speaking to people who are enjoying the coast there, the water there as well, is something I think which is very effective. And also looking at having a global simultaneous action in different places around the world, I think is also a very good idea. On April 23rd in 2021, when the decision was made by the Japanese government to go ahead with the discharge, since that day, on the 23rd of every month in Japan, we are having a standing protest. First, we were doing this within Fukushima Prefecture itself, but we have appealed to people around the whole of Japan And there are some places in France or even Vietnam, in different countries around the world, who are also doing actions on the 23rd of each month and sharing their photographs with our campaign. So there is also Sayonara Genpatsu, or Goodbye Nuclear Power Plants, which is a very large coalition of Japanese groups. And on April 23rd next year, they are also planning on having a very large event. So April 23rd might be a good day for a global day of action on this issue together next year. And we heard from Dr. Aja Makjani today, and hearing about the different results and so on of the experts committee, and looking at the insufficiency of data, this issue, and also environmental assessments, the fact that this has not been done thoroughly and comprehensively, and looking at the fact that alternatives are not being sufficiently considered is something which we were very strongly feeling, but having this kind of scientific backing in order to raise our concerns to TEPCO and the Japanese government is something that we felt very strongly in listening to your presentation. And this, well, utilization of nuclear technology in the first place was done without plans of what to do with the waste, without plans of what to do with these kind of issues. And this has led to so much suffering around the world. The reality about this has also been covered up. Health impacts have been overwritten, have been minimized, have been hidden, have been made secret. The different radioactive materials in the environment also being neglected, being released, being ignored, being covered up, is putting so many people's lives and livelihoods at risks. And this is something which we need to appeal strongly and together to people around the world as well. I hope that we can continue to work together from now to make sure that this nuclear contamination will not be expanded any further than it already is, to make sure that we will not worsen the environmental damage any further that it has already happened, and see how we can collaborate and coordinate together from now. And I think that looking at the relationships, the connections we've been able to make today, I hope we can continue in the future. And thank you so much for the opportunity today. Rico, thank you for your comments. We would like to open up a few more of the questions and comments which have been shared from the audience members. There are many, many different questions which are coming in. You can see some of them in the Q&A section. And Mari Inoue and also Kanda Mitsuta from FOE Japan will introduce some of them now. Over to you to do so.
All right.
Thank you
yes,
so
let
much.
me, I'm
I am
Mitsuta from
Mitsuta of
FOE. I'm going
FOE Japan.
to
We have many
introduce
questions
some
which
of
are
the
coming
questions
through,
that have
and
come. There
there's
were
so many
many
that we won't
questions
have
that came,
time
so
to
I cannot
introduce all of them.
introduce all of them, but I would
first
like
of all,
to
I'll share there are quite a few questions for Arjun.
mention a few,
First
especially
of
to
all,
Dr.
looking at,
Makijani. There's
there
one
was one
from
question from Dr.
Hisako Sakiyama.
which
Does the
is
detection of
looking at
tellurium, which has a very short life, mean that
does the detection
nuclear
of tellurium,
fission
which has a
has
very short
occurred?
life, mean that nuclear fission has
And
occurred?
is it possible to
And is
say
it
that
possible
the
to say that the
possibility
possibility of nuclear fission occurring again in debris is zero?
I'm going to mention about three. Another one to Dr. Makijani. From another person, what about the possibility of microorganisms increasing in the tanks during long-term storage of the water, and OBTs and other nuclei accumulating in the bodies of these microorganisms, and other organisms in the ocean also accumulating OBTs and other nuclides as the microorganisms are discharged into the ocean together with the water? And one more. Now, I agree with everything Dr. Makijani said, but he did not go in depth on the toxicity assessment of tritium water. I personally think assessments based on IAEA ICRP logic is totally unreliable. I would like to know your opinion.
In the first question, the translation and the speaker was going on at the same time, so I could not understand the first question. Can it please be repeated, the Friends of the Earth, that you asked your first question, please, Kana? I need a translation.
The question.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Apologies for that. We've just put it in the chat there now.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
Okay. So if there's no fission occurring, there should be no tellurium now. Tellurium should have been gone by the end of April 2011, approximately.
2011年4月には
So
事故で出
there
た
are
テ
only
ル
two
ルは消えている
possibilities.
はずなんです。なので可能性は2つです。一つは、
I'm hearing the translation so in Japanese at the same time. They have so. Okay, may I continue? Okay. So if tellurium occurs only with fission reactions in this context, so it should be gone. The only two possibilities are TEPCO's measurements are wrong and misplaced, or there are accidental chain reactions occurring in the molten core in the reactors. And so when the water is being used to cool the core, it is collecting some tellurium. I think I would lean personally toward the explanation that the measurements are maybe not being properly done, because this happened once before in 2011 when Ferenc and raised this question, and I looked at his calculations and supported his analysis. And then TEPCO did not discuss saying, okay, there are some criticalities going on or measurements are wrong. They just removed the data and said nothing. And this has been essentially the same. They were forced to say something, but what they said didn't make any sense. You know, to say 2019, 2014, December 2011, none of those answers made any sense. So basically, as we sit here, we don't know the answer to what those numbers mean. It could mean there are some accidental criticalities. More likely, I think, problem with the measurements, which is why I said, as I sit here, I cannot say that I have confidence in any numbers that TEPCO is putting forward, because they're unwilling to address an obvious problem in their data. And that's the most I can say about that. About the other questions regarding microorganisms building up in the tanks, I don't know that this has been studied at all. Certainly, microorganisms would absorb tritium. You know, the energy system that we have, which is the remnants of bacteria in the cells, which are the mitochondria, is the same in fish. It is the same in algae. It is the same in plants. It is the same in shellfish. It is the same essentially in all multicellular living beings. And so if tritium is going to affect mitochondria, as I have explained, then it is going to affect all the living beings in that way, because we have the same energy system. We convert food into energy by the same. It's an amazing thing of evolution that the energy system has been maintained throughout all the multicellular creatures and more. So in regard to the last question about tritium and the IAEA, and this is one of the reasons I wrote a book about tritium, it's not that the assessments of tritium by the IAEA are wrong. It is that they are too narrow and are not looking. So for example, the question that I have raised, how does tritium affect the energy system? If you affect the energy system adversely and damage the mitochondrial DNA, does it reduce your ability to fight diseases? During pregnancy, what happens to the fetal development if tritium goes in and the mitochondria are damaged? We know we inherit mitochondria from our mothers. What happens if the mitochondria in the ova are damaged? What happens to a girl child's children, so 2 generations. None of these questions have been studied. And I'm confident of this because in 23 years ago, my colleague and I wrote a letter to the US National Academies about this problem. And we urged them to study it because they were writing their big report on radiation health effects, which they published in 2006. And in that report, they mentioned our letter and they said, we are not going to study this now. We will leave it for future research. Well, future research hasn't actually officially appeared. And so this year in 2022, January, I again raised it with the National Academy of Sciences, saying multi-generational impacts, the impacts of tritium. You have not studied it. That memo is on our website. If I can send a message to everybody, I would be happy to put a link to my memorandum to the National Academies on the question this year. Yeah, I'll do that, at least for the panelists, and from there you can circulate it. So that's my answer to the 3 questions. Sorry, it took a while.
Thank you, Dr. Makjani. There's a question in English to everyone. Has anyone pursued any legal action at the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea that public can support? Anyone?
I think legal action.
It seems that Arjun's connection may have just frozen a little bit now. If we have any other questions or comments while we're waiting for Arjun to be able to join us once again, perhaps we can continue. There were also perhaps some questions about the Japanese situation. Kanna, if you can share. I think there is some questions to the organizers of today as well. There is a question about what your organization's next steps to tackle the government's plan will be and what you think will be direct or effective counteractions to stop the discharge. So this is, I think, something which has been commented on a little bit in the discussion until now, but if we can deepen this further, perhaps Riko Muto can respond to this. Thank you very much. So as I briefly mentioned before, April 23rd last year will be 1 year since the government's decision about the discharge. And so we are now preparing various actions or thinking about what will be best to do at that timing. And I also mentioned a postcard campaign that we are doing at the moment. This is letters addressed to the Fukushima governor and also the mayors of Futaba and the areas around the Fukushima nuclear power plants. At the moment, we are sending these just once to each of them, but showing these as, voices of people connected, of the voters, of the local residents, and so on, but voices of people who are related to this issue. So this is a campaign we're doing locally at the moment. Whether if this is effective, of course, is something that we're not sure, but looking at what sort of small steps that we can be doing locally in regards to this one by one, seeing how this can be connected and developed further. So we hold some kind of hope that, of course, this will have an impact. Terumi, do you have anything else that you would like to share? Yes, so to be honest, it's there's a lot of things that everything is happening really on a daily basis, and so we're very struggling just to keep up and deal with the day-to-day situation. In our negotiations with the energy agency of the ministry, we have been calling on them to hold information sessions and hearings for local residents. We have been calling on this repeatedly of the government, but the energy agency has said that they have no plans to do so. This is all that they respond to us with. But we are saying that this is not enough, as stakeholders to this issue, the local residents, they have the right and responsibility in regards to this. So we're calling on the government to have more thorough hearings and information sessions for the local population. This is one of the things that we are working on locally. Thank you. So let's go to the next question. Arjun, it looks like you're able to rejoin us again. Thank you very much for that. Welcome back. And Mari, would you like to introduce some of the questions which have come in English?
Sure. So there's a question from Alfred Meyer. Since the mission of the IAEA is to promote nuclear technology, could this lead them to not want to identify the significant problems of nuclear technology? Can you unmute?
I wouldn't say that it would lead them to not identify the problems. That might happen too. There's more as to your assessment of how serious something is and how much you should balance in a way, as they say, the costs and benefits. So I don't know about the IAEA, but I'll give you an example from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that happened in the aftermath of Fukushima, and a lesson that the nuclear establishment refuses to learn, not only in this country, but obviously everywhere. So the problem in these reactors that we have, the light water reactors, is the problem of meltdowns. That is the main accident problem. And when there's a meltdown, there's hydrogen, and the hydrogen explodes. That's what happened in Fukushima. It also happened at 3 Mile Island. There was a hydrogen fire or explosion, but it did not damage the containment, unlike Fukushima. But there was hydrogen, and there was a hydrogen fire or explosion. So this problem arises from the material from which the fuel rods are made when there's a loss of coolant. There's zircaloy material. It reacts with steam. This problem has been known since 1978, and it was called to attention by the man who designed those fuel rods, Mr. Gulbrandsen. After 3 Mile Island, it should have been clear that he was right, that maybe we should research another material. Researching a material for fuel rods, very complicated. After Fukushima, the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission wrote a safety report. What should we do? Make the batteries higher, have more fuel oil on site, whatever. It was a good report. But they did not consider this problem. Should we make fuel rods out of another material so we won't have hydrogen and we won't have explosions? Since there was not this in the report, I raised it. I said, why did you not consider this issue? It is an issue. It is the source of these meltdown problems and explosions. And they were very reluctant to answer. They avoided the question, but I insisted, and they said, well, it's the same problem with all reactors, so we didn't consider it. I would have thought that if it is the same problem with all reactors, we should pay more attention to it, not less, because it is the main problem with meltdowns. So there you have an example. I would say that the IAEA, as an agency that makes its authority known on safety, and that's a word that was used by the Director General in his presentation to the Pacific Islands Forum, that we are the scientific authority, basically. And so they are. This is a question that they should have insisted on a long time ago. They should have done in France, in Japan. Every nuclear regulation authority should have raised this question, but none have done so. So that is my exhibit A is that in 2022, if we wanted nuclear power and we think it's important for climate or whatever, there should have been an alternative material for fuel rods by now. So going forward, we won't have meltdowns. But it's a hard problem. It's not an impossible problem. I know this because I have researched it, but it may be a costly problem. So it is not being done. So it's not that they won't. Yeah, it's more complicated. The conflict of interest is very deep, and the way it expresses itself is not straightforward, but it is very much there.
Thank you, Dr. Makjani. There's a comment from one of the audiences to Tsukuru-san. Tsukuru-san, thank you for elevating our own denial or ignorance of contamination of our U.S. waters and Pacific Ocean via San Onofre by liquid regular batch releases mandated as safe by our own regulators. It's terrible. So thank you so much, Tsukuru-san, for raising this.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you to all of our panelists and audience. We would love to continue the discussion, but we're actually already past our planned finish time. So we will close the panel discussion and Q&A now. But thank you so much for the many active questions, comments, and discussion which came through. So we will have some closing words from Oda Chiyo. So Oda Chiyo, if you are with us to have the closing words for today's session on behalf of Kore Umi. Ms. Oda, if you can turn yourself off mute. Just bear with us for one moment. And Ms. Oda is just turning her camera on now. Here we are. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us for this very long and full program today. We had many people joining us from countries all around the world to look at this issue of the Fukushima contaminated water. We had many different recommendations, comments, suggestions, ideas in a very precious time for discussion together. So thank you so much, everybody, for sharing your perspectives, the information, looking at this is something which needs to be approached from all kinds of directions. So this was very important for us today. For those of us from different positions, different backgrounds, hearing these explanations and opinions, suggestions was something that I think for all of us looking at this situation, I live within 50 kilometers of the nuclear power plant. So this is a place, of course, which had delicious fish and seafood that we were always treasuring and enjoying in our lives. However, after the Fukushima nuclear power plant disaster, the fishers, their suffering has been immense, the fishing industry and all of the fishermen. And of course, the rest of the local community as well is still continuing to suffer even today in many ways. Now, looking at this plan to release the contaminated water into the ocean feels to us almost like another nuclear disaster happening. This is something very serious. And your voices, the fact that it is reaching people around the world, and yet the Japanese government and TEPCO is trying to prevent people from hearing these kind of voices, trying to make sure that this does not receive the attention that it does require and deserve. This is a very serious issue, and we don't know how long it will even continue for. So these voices of concerns coming from all around the world, they are trying to put the lid on these voices and make sure that they are not heard as much as needed. However, we cannot stop raising our voices, and we must do this together. We will continue to hold these concerns, these worries, and make sure that we do not pass on this situation to the next generation. We cannot allow that to happen. We will do all that we can and do it all as much as possible together to pass on a clean ocean and clean world for the next generations and continue to raise our voices and actions together for this. We know this is a busy time of year in December, but we're very glad that towards the end of the year, we feel that this was almost a Christmas present to us to be able to share this time at the end of the year. We hope that you all stay well, stay healthy, and we'll continue to raise our voices and action together from now. Thank you so much. Ms. Oda, thank you for these words. On behalf of the organizers today, we had a great opportunity for connections and ideas today, and this can be a new start together in our actions as well. We would like to hereby end today's symposium. Thank you for staying with us for these several hours today. We have had many questions asking whether the archives will be made public, and also for the presentation materials and contact details of the panelists today. Koreumi, as the organizers, we will share this with those registered today and also on our blog and social media as possible as well. Once again, thank you, and let's continue to raise our voices together as we can. Thank you very much once again for joining us today.